Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, we give you thanks for all the gifts that you have bestowed on us, especially for those people who have made this day possible. Energetic and committed students, generous parents and benefactors, devoted faculty, staff, and administrators. Guide us with your wisdom and strengthen us in your service and the service of all your people. We ask this through Jesus, our risen and ascended Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever.
Amen.
Please be seated. As Chancellor of St. John's University, on behalf of the sponsoring Benedictine community and in the name of the Board of Regents, I herewith call into session this commencement convocation at the conclusion of our 144th year of the conferring of academic degrees granted by this university. I request Brother Dietrich Reinhardt, President of the University, to take charge of these exercises.
This is a day of glad and joyful celebration. St. John's University has kept this day each spring since its founding before the Civil War. The annals of St. John's are replete with descriptions of each year's commencement. The accounts dwell on the solemnity of the baccalaureate Mass, the music, choral and instrumental, speeches, short and long, commonplace and memorable, and then the protracted goodbyes. Sometimes the ritual never seemed to stop. That was the case 100 years ago in 1901, when the services began at 6 o'clock in the morning and paused a little before noon. There followed a choice dinner and then a great procession to the Collegeville station, out a gravel road, later paved, which we now call the Old Entrance. The procession was led by waving banners and flying streamers, accompanied by the martial sounds of the drum and fife. After treading its way through the woods for a mile, the procession ended at the Collegeville station, where graduates and their families boarded a special Great Northern train, decked out in the St. John's colors. Then, to the continued sound of fife and drums, the train pulled out of the station, and the crowd kept cheering until the very last car rolled out of sight. On this joyful day, in this long-hallowed place, you, the class of 2001, enter that long stream of St. John's graduates who gathered together one last time to celebrate how their lives had been enlarged by what they had learned here, by the teaching and mentoring of professors known by their first name, by the cultivation of friendship and solitude, prayer and service, by the sheer beauty of this place and its power to anchor a whole life's journey. We join together in a ritual that places us outside time a bit, so that we can all concentrate our minds upon this remembered earth, shaped so indelibly by lives lived together in community the last 4 years. The ritual of commencement brings before us, for a brief moment, the habits of mind, the capacity for wonder, the inbreaking of truth, which result from the great, amiable conversation of ideas, which is at the heart of this Catholic and Benedictine liberal arts community. Scarcely any of us will remember much about this event at all, but it will live on. It will live on in our deepest selves, where the deepest truths of our lives are strong and powerful. It is fitting that we now enter into the heart of this commencement with the address by a member of the graduating class who has been chosen by his classmates. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Joe Tinguely.
What a beautiful day. And what a great place to be. But how odd does that sound for those of us graduating today? For the past several years, St. John's has not been some romantic or idyllic place. It's simply been our home. St. John's is the place where we hang out, and do our homework, and shave. And the people sitting around us, well, these are the people that we hang out and do our homework with. But few people get a chance to hang out and do their homework and shave at a place like St. John's. At how many other places can you go to the refectory and see an old monk returning from Mass dressed in a habit, sit down and share a meal with the rugby team, grass-stained and wet from their afternoon practice? That sight always made me laugh. I couldn't help but wonder what they might be talking about. At how many other places can you go for an afternoon walk or a run and literally get lost in acre upon acre of woodland and prairie, wetlands and oak savanna, but always within earshot of the bell banner? The bells will call you safely home at the same time they call the monks to their evening prayer. At how many other places can you return home after a long day of class, work, studying, and intramurals to find a bunch of guys, your floor mates and friends, packed into a little dorm room, talking honestly about issues like trying to balance career goals with family values? I mean, where else can you discuss the real issues that we as men face in today's world? All over a raging game of Mario Kart. And how many other places on earth can you walk down to the bookstore and get on a bus that within a couple of minutes deposits you directly at the center of a community bursting at the seams with young women? These women have become our best friends, our intellectual and professional peers, and for some of us, our spouses. What a bus. So taking all of this into consideration and looking back over my past 4 years at St. John's, I guess I really only have one thing to add. I wish I never went to St. John's. How much easier would my life have been had I never taken one step onto this campus? How blissful would my life be had I never met these professors and the monks and you, the students? It was you, the professors, who are to blame for the difficulty in my life. Because from the very first to the very last assignment, you insisted that life was not black and white. You actually required us to study and defend positions that seemed quite wrong and useless. The wrong answer for you was the one that failed to challenge one's perspectives and understand other positions. You professors had the nerve to come into an all-guys school and make us hear the voice of women. You forced us to consider our own positions and actions and how they affect the lives of others. How much more difficult and complex is my life because I have to consider other people? And for this heavy burden you have placed upon my life, I will never forgive you. And how much more demanding is my life because of you, the monks, whose very lives, dedicated to spiritual and community growth, turn on its head everything for which our culture of comfort, success, convenience, and individuality stands, whose world of simplicity, spirit, and community is untimely proof that there is another way to live. Now when I hear people remark that, sure, things in our society aren't perfect, but that's just the way life is, I can only shake my head and say, how much easier would life be if that were true? But the burden you, the professors and monks, added to my life pales in comparison to the challenge put forth by you, the students, because it was you who taught me how to love. I realize the risk one takes in talking about love to a group of young men, and so do you. That's why in all your acts of charity and friendship, you never once used the word love. No, we needed a much safer and cooler word. So when you were walking around campus and smiled at or greeted everyone, even people you didn't know, an act that surprises guests and newcomers and at any other place would be perceived as love, nah, here, that's just cool. And in the dorms, where you became friends with people different from you, people you never would have hung out with in high school, that was cool. When you planned all year to spend your 1 week of vacation time learning about and helping others in Catholic worker houses and food shelters all across the country, that was pretty cool. When you stood together with your friends and classmates in times of great misfortune, like the death or unfortunate injury of a loved one, it was really sweet, guys. That was cool. And there was that time, a couple of days before the official move-in date of our first year, when I sat alone in the corner of the refectory, hiding from the only other people there, the burly and confident football players. When you came over and introduced yourself to me and welcomed me to St. John's, that was love. That was really cool. So cool, in fact, that I wanted to be like you. I wanted to become friends with people I didn't know. I wanted to become part of a community of classmates and friends. I wanted to meet that guy sitting alone in the refectory, just like you. But it isn't always easy. There are times when I was much too busy to introduce myself to that guy sitting alone. There are times when it was uncomfortable or embarrassing to stand next to my classmates and friends. In fact, sometimes it's downright difficult to be cool in a world that, as we all know, is not so cool at all sometimes. Yes, how much more challenging and uncomfortable is my life because I've met you, the men of St. John's. I will never forgive you. And you, the professors and monks, how much more difficult is life for us students because of you. We shall never accept your apologies. We want revenge. We want someone to pay for the challenge and difficulty you have placed on our lives. But graduating seniors, we will never avenge ourselves here at St. John's, for these old professors and monks are a lost cause. Rather, let's seek our revenge out in the world. Let's get our payback by making the comfortable and blissful lives of others as challenging and difficult as ours. In the boardrooms and in our interviews, when everyone else is quick to make judgments or ignore the views of others, let's get our payback there by forcing them to recognize how their actions and decisions affect the lives of others. Let us challenge them to consider other perspectives and viewpoints. If such decisions can't be easy for us, let's not let them be easy for others. And in our communities and neighborhoods, let's get our revenge by opening up for those we live with other ways of doing things, creative and fair solutions to difficult problems, different and better ways of treating our environment. We now have the burden of knowing how our actions affect others and affect the earth. Let's get some satisfaction by placing that burden upon others as well. Let's be cool in our families, as fathers and uncles and grandfathers, and our friends at St. Ben's as mothers and aunts. Let's challenge our children and loved ones to avoid quick and easy answers because some problems, as we know, are difficult and complex. Even when our children make horrible mistakes, like considering St. Thomas, let's try to stay cool. Let's try. Let us be so cool that others want to become like us. We will get our revenge when we challenge others as we were challenged. And there's a lot out there to challenge. And there's a lot out there to challenge us. It's time we go now and get our vengeance. But let's not go just yet. Soon enough, we will find ourselves in some city with some job and a family and a different life. Tomorrow you will wake up and find yourself in a different home. You will shave in a different sink and tell your jokes to different people. The next time you look up, you might find yourself with a couple extra pounds and a couple extra mortgages. And you'll trip across pictures and memories of your college years and of today, and you'll remember how good it was. But as much as today is about going out into the world and making new homes, right now, and for the last time, you are still in this home. Soon enough, this home will be a fond memory and a great picture, but not today. Now we are here, and now we are together. So today, let us live out our pictures and laugh in our future memories. Surely we look forward to tomorrow and how good it will be. But we are all friends, and we'll miss each other. So let us live now and celebrate together how good this is. Yeah, what a beautiful day. And what a great place to be. But how odd does that sound for those of us graduating today? Because soon we will be called by name and sent out into the world. So good luck. God bless. Get your revenge. And be cool. Be very cool.
Joe, thank you very much for a memorable message. Fred, would you stand, please? It's my privilege this afternoon to present to you Fred de Sam Lazaro for the degree Doctor of Laws honoris causa. Fred de Sam Lazaro, whether it's happening in Rwanda, KwaZulu-Natal, Banja Luka, or on Lake Street, Minneapolis, we have come to rely on you for the story that the others won't cover, to go where the others don't go. And from you, we know we will get the whole story. We will be enlightened, not simply updated. You first riveted public radio listeners nationwide in the early 1980s with your coverage of the collapse of the iron ore industry and the devastation it brought to Minnesota's Iron Range. We have been eagerly listening, and when you moved to the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, watching ever since. While most national media ignore Africa, you went there to bring us the horrifying story of the AIDS epidemic in South Africa and to examine it in all its complexity. You did not simply recite the appalling statistics. You also spoke to the dying villagers, the exhausted doctors, the baffled public health workers, the overwhelmed church workers, and the frustrated political leaders. Bosnia and its plight has become no more than a fleeting headline on most news shows, but you went there to tell us the story of a torn and tired people struggling to go forward in the aftermath of war. We see the Muslim whose village was destroyed by Christian soldiers. We also meet the Christian in the neighboring village whose brother was killed by Muslim forces. You do not bring us any easy answers. You do give us the opportunity to fully understand the questions. You invite us to see into the heart of our times with intelligence, compassion, and cultural sensitivity. In doing this, you strengthen our capacity to create peace, justice, and understanding in our world. For bringing us the whole story, St. John's University recognizes you with gratitude and confers upon you, Fred de Sam Lazaro, the Doctor of Laws honoris causa on this, the 27th day of May, 2001.
Thank you, Neil. Brother Dietrich, Abbot Clausen. It is a profound honor to be here today on this magnificent campus. A very special moment. I want to dedicate and thank my spouse and companion of my entire adult life, Kay, Anthony, Shireen, and Shanti, for tolerating, among other things, a very rigorous travel schedule for the past several years. It's a great honor to get this doctorate. I'm hard-pressed to resist invoking our president from a few days ago at Yale and saying, for those of you who really earned a doctorate, I commend you. And for the C students in this group, you too someday can get a doctorate. I was not a C student. I did graduate 20 years ago, almost precisely to the day, from the College of St. Scholastica, which is a sister Benedictine institution. I want to begin by congratulating first the parents in this group. It's a turning point in your lives when the bills start going to your son's address. And you hope that that is not the same as your own address. Congratulations also, of course, to you graduates who are probably becoming familiarized with your Aunt Sally May, that is. You'll be getting a proposition in the mail which will offer to extend your student loans over a period of 10 years. Smaller monthly payments, but 10 years. And it's sobering to me that it's been 10 years since I settled with Sally Mae. 20 years. I must tell you, I don't remember much from the commencement speech 20 years ago. I, in fact, don't even remember who it was who spoke to us. I do remember the youthful energy, the idealism, the anxiety, the hormones that were seldom understood, sometimes out of control. I can tell you 20 years down the line, you feel you can control your hormones. You do understand them better. You just can't find them very frequently. Seriously, a world that is black and white when you first get out of college, filled with good guys and bad guys on every issue, slowly becomes one in which you really can't tell one from the other unless you buy some of the stuff you hear on the radio or on television. And if there's anything I want to urge you to do today, it's to shop a little more carefully for your information. 20 years is really not a very long time. But I must say that these past 20 years have to be the fastest in which history has ever moved. Consider this. When I graduated from college, I did my term papers on a Sears electric typewriter, and the electric part was a big deal. My first job was with Minnesota Public Radio, which has deep roots on this campus here in Collegeville, and they gave me a manual typewriter to work with. There were no computers, no faxes, no web or email. Long distance was long distance, not the oxymoron that it has become today. Technology has shrunk this world incredibly, and this really came back to me a few weeks ago in Dakar, Senegal, where I was with your esteemed Professor Nick Hayes, looking one evening for sex workers. Don't worry, this is a clean story. We wanted to interview women who were on the front lines of the African AIDS epidemic. And one of the first questions we were asked, as we always are in places like Africa and India, whether the broadcast would be seen in their countries. They obviously don't want this. And we've always been able to respond reassuringly that no, this is just for American television and it's for a channel that almost everyone does not watch. No worry. But I had to pause this time, as I have had to in recent months, because of the internet. Everything that I do for the NewsHour is on the internet, accessible worldwide almost immediately after it's been broadcast, and frequently in streaming video. So how are you equipped going into this new economy, the brave new world of WordPerfect and writable CD-ROMs, from a campus that has gone backwards, way backwards, to commissioning the first handwritten Bible since the Middle Ages? I know from the China program that I'm familiar with, and several others, that this is a campus that has gone out of this way to help its young people understand this new world with no long distance. A world that few of us really understand adequately, and a world that I dare say is not accurately portrayed to us in the media. Television as we know it may be endangered because of the technological revolution, but is the replacement likely to enlighten us? Maybe someday. I can tell you so far there's no sign of it. If anything, technology has been a splintering force. A nation that used to watch 3 or 4 channels a few years ago is now watching dozens of channels and thousands of websites. There's not much to talk about the next day because we've all watched something else. And all this, I think, is scattering this idea of what I call the American village that so impressed me as a new immigrant a quarter century ago. I also fear that we may be losing an attribute that I first heard coined by Mahatma Gandhi, but it's one that the Benedictines have always had as a very fundamental value. Gandhi called it the dignity of labor. I was born and spent most of my early years in India, a land burdened by the age-old caste system. Your work determined your station in life, still does for the most part. And of course, those who work with their hands and sweat are at the bottom and never escape. Caste is ingrained over the millennia, an evil that 50 years of legislation has not been able to eradicate. So when I arrived in America, it was impressive to me that the men and women who farmed, mined, plucked turkeys, or hauled trash could lead dignified middle-class lives. They sat on bleachers and committees in school and church with doctors and lawyers, which they told their children they could be if they wanted. Of course, I'm romanticizing this picture as much as I'm generalizing. Journalists tend to do this. But this was a young immigrant's view. America was a much fabled place, and the picture was not entirely inaccurate, especially in small-town America. At any rate, these so-called working people wanted their children to be educated in places like this, to go further, and they did. They went on to become the post-industrial elite, if you will. And they began moving into suburbs, looking for that small-town community that they remembered from their childhood, seeking open space, tranquility, and an escape from the problems that could be watched from a safe distance on the television at night. Arguably, they got much farther away from that village. They began living in homes tightly clustered by price, little or nothing available for folks who could only rent. The people who pluck turkeys and slaughter hogs now live far away, geographically and culturally. They are not like us anymore. They are not a part of us, like they used to be a generation or two ago. They are immigrants. I can't tell you how many letters, emails, and calls we get every time we run a broadcast about this subject, about immigrants who don't want to assimilate or learn English, who drain the public trough, who are a burden on taxpayers, who carry false papers, who worship false gods. What you hear very seldom is that Minnesota would not have a meatpacking industry or a poultry industry, the backbone of the rural economy of the state, without immigrant labor. There would not be health care in many small towns in America without immigrant doctors. I invite you to drive down Lake Street in Minneapolis or University in St. Paul to see this resurrection of communities that were left for dead. Illegal immigrants? Why not put one or two employers in jail for hiring illegals? That'd stop the practice in a hurry. The answer is these people may just be needed to work because there's no one else left to do it. Now, I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression that I'm calling for more immigration or less immigration. Rather, we should be talking about this issue at several levels. How many people can this country afford to take in? Who should they be? Where should they live? How should we prepare the immigrants and their host communities? Should we change family reunification rules that allow relatives of immigrants to come in when the nature of the American family itself is changing? What do we owe a poor nation from whence come the most talented people? There are 33,000 doctors of Indian origin practicing in the United States today. educated in India, and you have some idea of what a medical education costs. You see, it's difficult to find good guys and bad guys on the subject of immigration, and I could have picked any number of issues. But there never is a shortage of fingers pointed. Where is the reasoned dialogue on these issues? On talk radio? Local television news? I don't see it. Did you know that 70% of all news stories on local television are less than 1 minute long? 16% are 2 minutes long. I'm not even talking about what's in these stories. Yet studies show that that's where most of us are getting our information. Perhaps that's why the only thing we seem to know about Bill Clinton is that he is a philanderer, or George Bush, that he is dumb and got a C average at Yale. What's the answer? Public television? McNeil Lehrer? A show that has actually proclaimed that we dare to be boring? Think about that. The federal government that leases forest land to paper companies, collects royalties from oil companies, does nothing of the sort with broadcasters who have been given billions of dollars worth of free airwaves. Bob Dole called it corporate welfare. It is our duty to hold them accountable for the public service they promised in exchange. Perhaps we have to create a bigger market for boring television, whatever it morphs into in the digital age. Public radio too. I hope that I can invite you to watch, to listen, before jumping to your reasoned conclusions, to not buy what you hear without making sure you've heard all sides of the issue, to understand the public policy issues of this day, however boring they seem. Trust me, it's like many vegetables you probably hated as a child, but got to love at St. John's. I hated fish as a child. My favorite food today is sushi. And it didn't take 20 years to get there. News and public affairs need not be entertaining to be interesting. And it's imperative that you become interested. Citizenship is a valuable thing. Ask any immigrant. I hope you'll take a bit of this Benedictine village into the bigger world, the shrinking bigger world that your student speaker talked about. To broaden the idea of the village, to recognize those on the margins, whether they pluck your Thanksgiving turkey in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota, or ply the streets of Dakar, Senegal, reduced to the indignity of prostitution to survive. Prostitution that forces many young women to take unimaginable risks, like accepting an invitation from 4 middle-aged foreign men to a hotel room at 2 a.m. for a TV interview. I'm sure they thought that we were just looking to wake up those hormones until they got to the hotel and discovered that there really was a camera set up with lights and sound. I'm sure they wondered, what are these men up to? Would this be seen by people they knew? Will my mother see this on television? Asked one of the women. Very, very unlikely, I replied at first. The NewsHour does not have much of a following in West Africa, internet or no internet. They clearly were unconvinced. And I realized quickly that they would never, ever understand my world in American television. And I decided that this was no way to learn about their world. They offered to share their stories for more money than the lost wages that we offered to compensate them for. It was a cold, risk-based calculation. They didn't trust us, and so it would cost a bit more. Just a perfectly wonderful capitalist idea for a globalized world. But I told them to leave. I have never interviewed anyone whose trust I did not have. And I'm thankful to have a value system profoundly shaped by Benedictines, and to be able to work on a program that allows me this luxury. I'm not sure what I would have done if I had an editor asking me to bring back a juicy story featuring two beautiful, attractive young women. These two young women had morphed very quickly, in my eyes, from street prostitutes to young women not unlike my own daughter, young women who, but for an accident of birth, could well have been in the graduating class at St. Ben's this year. I want to end by urging you to not forget this place, and you've already been urged very eloquently to not forget this place. No matter how far you travel, I do hope it will be far. I'm confident you won't. And I'm certain there'll be an alumni magazine in the mail, along with the coupons from Sally Mae, just to remind you that your stint here was worthwhile. You know it today. I hope you'll keep coming back here to visit. Thank you very much. All the best.
The Pax Christi Award is the highest honor awarded by St. John's Abbey and University. It is given to individuals who have distinguished themselves by lives that exemplify the ideals of St. Benedict, who across the millennia urges us to seek after peace and pursue it. Born in Kansas and raised in Kansas and Missouri, Douglas Johnson was formed in the Disciples of Christ tradition. As a young man, he studied nonviolence and served as a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. Educated at Macalester College and Yale University, he achieved international recognition as the leader of the Nestle boycott, the first successful international consumer boycott. He now serves as executive director of the Center for Victims of Torture, a treatment center for the rehabilitation of survivors of politically motivated torture. He also serves as an original member of the advisory panel on the prevention of torture, formed by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to end torture in that region. The Latin words Pax Christi mean peace of Christ. We recognize in Douglas Johnson a man of faith who has made the peace of Christ living and real for those unjustly held captive throughout the world and cruelly subjected to torture. We rejoice in the healing gifts of the Holy Spirit that he has shared so generously and without counting the cost. Douglas, would you please stand? Douglas Johnson, you offer the world a new telling of the ancient story of David and Goliath. You give us a new David, David without a slingshot, without a stone, but a David who calls Goliath to account nonetheless. The great peacemaker Mahatma Gandhi said, "Nonviolence is the first article of my faith. It is also the last article of my creed." Hearing Gandhi's words echo in the teachings of your Christian faith, You went to India as a young man to live and study at Gandhi's ashram. From that time forth, you have never deviated from your conviction that Christ calls us to build a just world for all peoples, and he teaches us that it cannot be done with weapons. You directed the Third World Institute at the Newman Center at the University of Minnesota for 7 years, studying the aspirations of the people of the developing world and giving them a voice at the council tables of the powerful. You then helped found the Infant Formula Action Coalition and initiated and led a worldwide boycott against Nestle, the world's largest food company, for its unethical marketing practices of infant formula in third world countries. You persisted for 8 years, marshaling the energies of committed people everywhere to accomplish the first successful international grassroots consumer boycott. This resulted in the first international marketing code requiring minimum ethical standards in marketing practices. You now direct the Center for Victims of Torture in Minneapolis, a place of healing and hope for those who have suffered the most extreme cruelty the human mind can devise. You gave me back my life, said a survivor treated at the center, speaking for hundreds. You dug me up from my grave, said another. Under the 13 years of your leadership, the Center for Victims of Torture has become the foremost center of its kind in the United States. Joining hands across borders, the center is at the forefront of an international effort to create a world without torture. You have given your life to giving back lives to the helpless and often hidden victims of economic and political violence throughout the world. For your steadfast commitment to building a just world using just means, we gratefully present you Douglas A. Johnson, Executive Director of the Center for Victims of Torture, with our highest honor, the Pax Christi Award, on this, the 27th day of May, in the year of our Lord 2001, in omnibus glorificetur Deus.
I'd like to start by urging everyone to have a good cough, please. Thank you. Thank you, Brother Dietrich, Abbot John, members of the Abbey of St. John, of the Board of Regents, the faculty and students. I'm very touched to receive this award from a community whose values and commitments I so highly esteem. What sustains one's work is both complex and simple. I believe in the power of ideas to transform our world for the good and also for the bad. But ideas have to be put into action to have an effect. We each need a circle of support to help us put our ideas into action. My family, and especially my wife, Catherine Sickink, has helped to sustain me in my work, and I thank her. I thank them. The intelligence and commitment of the staff at the center also makes each day a new opportunity, and I thank them for the privilege of working with them. Each graduate here today has your own circle of family and friends. You will need them to sustain you on your journey. A couple of months ago, Catherine and I went to Guatemala in order to pursue our separate work, but also to introduce our two sons to a country that we loved very much. It was positive, but both were very disturbed by the poverty and especially the hunger of the children. It frightened, it saddened them. I realized through their eyes that I had become inured to the feeling of being assaulted by poverty, and that some of this was a callus that I had formed over my consciousness to keep myself from discomfort. That discomfort may well be a very natural reaction to the ugliness of poverty, the ugliness of hunger, the frightening nature of torture, the inhumanity of war. But what we do with that discomfort is our own spiritual test. Will that repulsion lead us to avoidance or to action? Like all parents now in this audience, and the good brothers who dedicate themselves to shaping lives to work for peace, I'm struggling on how I can help shape my son's responses to this world's needs with a sense of responsibility and action. My message to them is what I also want to say to you about the choices that may be made. There is no word in any language that's more frightening than the word torture. The word bruises our very imaginations, but it's more than just a word. Torture was practiced last year in over 100 nations of the world, and over 60 nations invested in the infrastructures to make torture happen. Those governments do so because torture is the most effective weapon against democracy, shaping cultures by fear as people learn to be disengaged from civic life. Fear creates silence. But it's our own revulsion of the word, and especially when it leads to turning away to think of more pleasant things. It's that revulsion that perpetuates the use of torture. I learned from my work at the Center for Victims of Torture that victims are targeted because they were leaders in their communities. One of our clients was an African bishop, expressed this most simply. If they'll do this to me, he asked, what will they do to my flock? What will they do to my flock? By destroying a leader, a repressive government effectively frightens the leader's family, their network of followers and admirers, and so the entire community. Now, once this strategy is understood, the response should be very obvious. Healing the survivors of torture is also the task of recovering leadership that's been stolen by repression. Although the work is difficult, it is also full of the joy of service and knowing that we can make a difference in the world. There are now between 15 and 20,000 victims of foreign government torture living in the state of Minnesota. Between 15 and 20,000 survivors of torture. Every one of them is a potential leader with much to contribute to our communities if we will help them feel safe and through our actions reestablish their faith in others. It is our choice about how we will address the problems of our world. We can despair and retreat into the comforts and attractions of the material world. It is a relief to get a job, to get a good salary, to start paying student loans off. But it takes a very short time before we begin to understand that no salary, no matter how high, actually represents our worth or our value as a person. Or we can see these situations as an opportunity to act and to serve others. By giving hope to others, we find hope for ourselves. Your graduation today need not be the end of your experiences of deep community. Look for a job that attracts people that you admire, that challenges you to learn, and that gives you an opportunity to serve others. And you will find a life that you love. That is the joy I wish for my two very fine sons. And that's also the joy I wish to you. Thank you.
I have to make an announcement. There is a medical emergency. Would Mike and Kathy Greedle, parents of Brian, please go to the Great Hall?
Let's all say a prayer for whatever's going on, huh? Amen. On this commencement day, we celebrate achievements of teaching and learning. I would like to acknowledge two members of the faculty who have recently received singular honors. Dr. Annette Atkins, who has been named Michael Blecker Professor of the Humanities, and Dr. Thorpe Running, who has been named Regents Professor of Spanish. Dr. Running is seated to the right of the Abbott's throne. Dr. Atkins, could you please stand so we can recognize you both? I also would like to take this occasion to recognize two long-serving and generous members of the executive administration who are retiring at the end of this academic year. Mr. Michael White, Director of Financial Aid, who has served at St. John's for 26 years, and Mr. Warren Jansen, Vice President for Administrative Services, who has served for 34 years. I also want to thank Dr. Neil Thorburn, who has served as Interim Provost for Academic Affairs these past 2 years and will be leaving our campuses the better for his good and generous service. I invite each of these administrators to stand so we can recognize them. And now for the conferral of degrees.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Master of Arts and Master of Divinity please rise? Brother Dietrich, I present the candidates for the degrees of Master of Arts and Master of Divinity, which have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Master of Arts and Master of Divinity, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. Dr. William Cahoy, Dean of the School of Theology and Seminary, please have the candidates come forward.
The degree of Master of Divinity is conferred upon Virginia Bernauer Stillwell from Plymouth, Minnesota. The degree of Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry is conferred upon Gary R. Graham from Highwood, Montana. The degree of Master of Arts in Liturgical Studies is conferred upon Galen C. Knutson from Burnsville, Minnesota. The degree of Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry is conferred upon Tracy John Shar from West Fargo, North Dakota. The degree of Master of Arts in Theology with a concentration in liturgy is conferred upon J. R. Stymack from Great Falls, Montana.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science please rise? Brother Dietrich, I present the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science who have been approved by the faculty of St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science, which have been approved by the faculty of the University and the College of St. Benedict, and for which you have been recommended. Dr. Cheryl Knox, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, please have the candidates come forward.
Students, you may now be seated. The marshals will direct each row of graduates to rise and come forward for your diplomas as needed. Family and friends, I ask that you hold your applause until all diplomas are awarded, or we'll be here until Tuesday. Before I begin reading the names of graduates, I would like to recognize two families in memory of their sons who would have graduated with this class. Timothy and Patricia Babineau, in memory of their son Timothy John Babineau, and David and Margaret Randall, in memory of their son Patrick David Randall. Candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Arts, summa cum laude. Mark Eldon Berglund. Todd Christopher Blumhofer. Adam Robert Briggle. Christopher Edward Francis Chams. Jeffrey Michael Freihammer, all college honors with distinction in English. Michael Stephen Halverson. Aaron John Critch. Nicholas Paul Meyer. Brian Michael Smith, all college honors with distinction in English and German. Joseph John Tinguely, all college honors with distinction in philosophy. Mark Austin Whipple, all college honors with distinction in sociology. Candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Arts, magna cum laude. Michael David Babnick. Joseph Paul Bagnod. Daniel James Bentler. Neil Gerard Bjorkman. Michael John Borboom. Eric Benjamin Brever, all college honors with distinction in mathematics. Samuel Albert Lyle Bugby. Mark Allen Dodge. John Ulrich Fair. Sean Thomas Flannery. Nicholas Andrew Gary. Aaron Benjamin Johnson. Daniel Richard Kadrlik. John Thomas Knapp. Jesse Thomas Loudon. Brandon Anthony Moore. Timothy Joseph Otremba. Joshua Raymond Otto. Justin Damian Pigish, all college honors. Jeremy John Rigg. John McCambridge Scott. Jesse Daniel Spates. Matthew John Stockinger. Jeremiah Joseph Tischletter, all college honors with distinction in theater. Kenneth Michael Vernig. David Paul Weber, all college honors with distinction in economics. Todd Joel Weinhold. Mark Elias Wohl. Craig Allen Zwiefelhofer. Candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Arts, cum laude. John Theodore Borgen. Michael Anthony Breen. David Richard Bush, all college honors with distinction in physics. Ward Amos DeWitt IV. Nicholas David Dittrich. Frederick Michael Ebbinger. Michael Patrick Gander. Robert Andrew Gibson. Scott Charles Heilman. Brian Lawrence Johnson. Benjamin Michael Kiley. Michael Cyril Kramer. Thomas John Lands. Nicholas Grover Leonard. Matthew Lucas Lorenz. Jeffrey Alexander Macalena. Matthew Mark Merton. Alexander Edward Metler. Mark Peter Mudrenich. Dorian Philip Nelson. Andrew Peter Ullman. Thomas Glenn Piersma. Travis Donald Radel. Joseph Anthony Rotundi. Nathan Eugene Schultz. Joshua Nathan Sell. Alan Matthew Sorum. Adam Quinn Switlick. Justin John Towner. Brian Joseph Traxler. Thomas Philip Ward. Adam Lee Westman. Andrew Scott Wilcox. Will the candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Science please come forward? Patrick John Murray. Sean Patrick Murray. Stephen Paul Schmelzer. Will the candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Arts please come forward? Audience, please note these degrees are being awarded in the order of student procession. David Paul Ingham. Matthew Corbett Foley. Patrick Gary Bodiger. Patrick Joseph Malley. Michael T. Henry. Joshua John Schneider. Jason J. Thielen. James Luke Mitchell. Dustin Michael Tiemann. Lor Ning Lee. Blair Thomas Hovell. Gabriel William Halsey. Daniel Joseph Berendez. Mark Philip Kettleson. Daniel John Stepnick. Harold Walter Schultz III. Peter August Thompson Carlson. Thomas Finnegan Ziegler. Joshua Raymond LeClaire. Gus Kellum. Jacob Andrew Evans. Joshua Evans. Charles Gordon Bublitz. Jason James Thompson. Michael John Phelan. Stephen Vincent Luce. Ryan Lee Wagner. Bradley Adam Lynch. Kent Michael Knudsen. Todd David Larson. Troy Gregory Bigalki. Ryan Joseph Dusha. Christopher John Nordman. Brian Douglas Kraus. David Glenn Mayer. David John Stry. John Vincent Jones. Joseph Galvin. Jeffrey Allen McGrath. Ryan Patrick Kelly. Timothy Adam Finau. James Brian Berg. Eric Ronald Goodman. Christopher John Sudbeck. Brian W. Rose. Joseph Jacob Kuzma. Michael Aaron Hoberger. Jason Dietrich. Timothy Roy Bowman. Joseph Charles Nelson. Eric Daniel Hansen. Adam Louis Probelski. Nicholas Timke. Paul Daniel Hatefield. Mark Joseph Kellen. Macario T. Johnson. Kendrick Lerone McPhee. Ryan M. Lamsey. Aaron John Fulton. Andrew John Mesna. Joseph Frederick Beckman. Jeffrey Meade Stryer. Andrew Lee Loso. Sean Clifford Hermans, distinction in physics and mathematics. Jason A. Bartos. Travis John Dozenski. Michael Wallace Kunkel. James Mason Schnock. Paul Joseph Van Overbeek. Nicholas John Schicker. Robert John Schmidt. Gunnar Michael Christopher. Jason Michael Snowbrick. Robert Michael Spitzley. Nicholas Ryan Paul. David Michael Kren. Brian Allen Jarstad. Scott Henderson McMahon, Michael Charles Fox, Michael Keith Slavic, John Robert Mason, Nicholas Alexander Pulaski, Sean Maxon Crum, John Richard Workman, Pablo Manuel Silveira, Stephen Robert McGreevy, Distinction in Biology, Michael Ryan Martin, John Henry Schaus, Distinction in Political Science, Drew Thomas Brooksbank, Grant Gerald Litfin, Todd John Hillmeyer, David Allen Madison, Andrew Lloyd Stoff, Kevin Michael Conan, Ross Michael Gola, Jess John Asmussen, Kevin Thomas Smith, Eric Joseph Siss, Ryan Christopher Sawatsky, Brian Joseph Roars, Michael P. Senna, John Alvarez Powell, Ryan Patrick Kelly, Daniel Thomas Daly, Donald Francis Scheibel, Jacob Harrison Brooks, Michael John Moylanen, Samuel John Groby, Lance Allen Groby, Adam Michael Lutz, Daniel Jacob Scherer, Brian Johnston Warkalak, Nicholas John Simi, David Francis Moore, Robert Michael Smith, Derek Dahlheimer Schroeder, Ryan James Tritz, Michael Robert Rose, Christopher Greer Salvato, Matthew Roman Snowbrick, Kelly Allen Wynn, Christopher John Sheeran, Peter David Green, Douglas Reed Gribnow, Nathan Todd Peterfesco, Daniel Michael Myers, Daniel Gerard Power, Kyle Roy Schloman, Gregory Joseph Smith, Jeffrey Michael Gassell, Joshua Ronald Kobow, Joseph Louis Catu, Matthew John Spaniel, Daniel Thomas Wellna, Nicholas James Rowland, Adam Jeremy Carter, John Paul Solomon, Christian Scott Filiaggi, Nathan Walter Caring, Christopher William Kampshoff, Distinction in Computer Science, Brian Daniel Tyson, Philip Joseph Ryan, Bradley L. Pilcher, Kyle Dolan Johnson, David William Brust, Arlen Brian Stark, Michael John Cronebush, Eric Cyril Fisher, David Thomas Hartley, Michael Zazada, Brian Charles Christian, Robert Justin Cliff, Matthew James Thompson, Chad Michael Preble, Michael John Carlson, Michael Paul Oman, Matthew Thomas McGovern, James Robert Kazrowski, Chad Matthew Capra, Neil Edward Olness, Nicholas Tanner Charbonneau, distinction in management, distinction in computer science, Brian Neil Willert, Nicholas Stephen Dufault, John Paul Skretvet, Matthew L. Michelson, Brian Thomas Bellicott, John Van Hoven, Lorimer Walker Cushman, thank you, Nicholas Miles Samuelson, James Robert Peichel, Jeffrey Allen Tyson, Patrick Timothy Connell, John Lawrence Zins, Michael Donald Meyer, Nathan Andrew Reynolds, Jordan Patrick Foley, Anthony David Zemny, Peter Whitney Wanning, Thomas Howard Sweetman, Matthew Stephen Steele, Joseph Ryan Galen, Benjamin Ray Britton, Arthur Gerald Boylan, Nicholas J. O'Connell, Kyle Raphael Morozic, David Andrew Galloway, Cade William Schulke, John Christian Ward, Robert Thomas Schweitzer, John Charles Folletti, Bradley Edward Jordan, Eric Justin Sumangill, Matthew James Boran, Julian Iordanoff Tosev, Mark Thomas Weiler, Blair Richard Schwartz, Kenneth Lawrence Daly, Victor B. Bozhelov, Ethan Robert Sewell, Stephen Jerome Koschel, Daniel Dwayne Eveland, David Arthur Hassel, Eric Paul Weingart, Andrew Paul Lean, Matthew John Youngbauer, Gregory Martin Hocking, Eric Allen Tupy, Andrew J. Steffen, Timothy John Dahl, Brandon Michael Grakow, Brandon Michael Stender, Joshua David Moline, Michael John Temple, Matthew Moss Schenecker, Jason Peter Whittick, Christopher John Jacobson, Andrew Robert Case, Benjamin Thomas Grosick, Jeremy Christopher Pickwall, Joel David Towers, Jeremy John Forsell, Brad Allen Dingman, Joshua James Hart, Philip Robert Trier, Brian Joseph Zerbis, Peter Joseph Corcoran, Mark Nicholas Jerzak, Brandon George Novak, Timothy James Pahula, Alexander Stephen Wesley, Thomas John Linneman, Jeffrey Paul Swinson, Patrick James France, thank you, Patrick Lawrence Mack, Matthew Jeremiah Bradley, Christopher Myron Teal, Jamie Mitchell McFeeters, Jared Matthew Weesey, Patrick Sean Leo, Matthew Eric Lloyd, Bo Thomas Labor, Timothy John Schmidt, Nathan Eric Kirschner, Christopher Michael Hartnett, Stephen Donald Guptill, Jesse Joseph Hartman, John D. Meyer, Joshua Sean Reagan, Leo Henry Loxterkamp, John Giuseppe Fanucci, Anthony Tyrus Grazzini, Jeremy John Koopminers, Jason Edward O'Day, Blair Frederick Folkens, Adam Jeffrey Brett, Ross Erling Jerpseth, John Richard Conrad, Nels Wall Iliatello, distinction in German, Matthew Henry Casey, Paul Robert Lorengo, Sean Michael Whitehead, distinction in theater, Matthew Ryan McGrain, Owen Michael Rain, Thomas Joseph Rendulic, Christopher Matthew Moore, Andrew Lawrence Hover, Jacob Stephen Zauhar, Jason Ryan Hirsch, Thomas Humbird Farnham, Robert John Meyer, Hyun Jae Sung, Matthew David Michaels, Michael William Cohout, Eric Michael Ortman, Jacob Scott Schlegel, Jared Stephen Horgan, Jacob Duncan McClellan, Matthew Thomas Andrews, Greg Brian Fox, Nicholas Raymond Romero, Jacob Samuel Vibon, Lucas David Firkinoff, Michael James Murray, Thomas John Murray, Christopher Ryan Paul, Bradley Michael Nesnick, Stephen Joseph Holmberg Jr., David Michael Blessick, Jeffrey Albert Anderson, Daniel Lee Smith, Scott Edward Fear, Chad Christopher Hacker, Shane Elliott Stork, Michael Joseph Rose, Joseph William Green, Nicholas Mark DeVries, Benjamin David Vincent, Jeffrey Gruber Thomas, Adam Spanglet Klepetar, Thomas Louis Lewandowski, distinction in English All College Honors, Joey Van Phillips, Todd Matthew Wackendorf, Joseph Matthew Donlin, Carlos E. Yeager, Ryan Allen Anderson, Francis David Lardy, Nicholas James Zins, Matthew Arnold Thomas IV, Nicholas Matthew Saunders, yes, Timothy Richard Mazzina. Now,
and now the senior ensemble, graduating members of the chamber choir and men's chorus, will sing the Alma Mater and Gaudiamus Igitur in arrangements by Dr. Axel Timer. Before we leave this place, let us pay tribute once more to the people who have smiled the deepest and now and again shed a tear these last several hours. The mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers, brothers, sisters, relatives, and friends of today's graduates. Thank you for all that you have done to make this day possible, and most especially for the love and support which have brought these graduates to this time of new beginnings. Let us also express our gratitude to the faculty and staff of St. John's University and their colleagues from the College of St. Benedict, who are assembled in the choir stalls behind this podium. There would be little to celebrate today without the wisdom, dedication, and generosity of this remarkable community of educators. Let us all give them a rousing round of applause. We are about to break out of ritual time. As we do so, let us put on the armor of light and enter anew into a world in great need of love and service, wisdom and justice, a world where the meaning of what we have celebrated will be an ever-present source of guidance and strength within. And now, before we go, we need a song and a blessing to send us on our way. Please stand.
please bow your head and pray for God's blessing. May the God of all consolation bless you in every way and strengthen you for the journey ahead. Amen. May you always walk in God's ways, knowing what is right and good. Amen. May God enrich you with the gifts of faith, hope, and love, so that what you do in this life will bring you to the happiness of everlasting life. Amen. And may Almighty God bless you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.